Do not be afraid, but the afterlife might be completely different from what we imagine. For a long time, this information was hidden. Some considered it a mystification, others a sensation that could change our understanding of life and death. But why was this kept silent for so long? In these recordings, something is captured that is difficult to explain from a scientific perspective. Many who have heard them admitted that their worldview changed forever after listening to them. But what exactly was discovered? Why were these materials kept in the shadows for so long? And most importantly, what significance do they have for us? Perhaps the truth that could change everything is in this video. Friedrich Jürgenson was born in Estonia and showed many talents from his childhood. He performed on European stages as an opera singer, painted pictures, and made documentaries. But among his hobbies, there was one that was special: sound recording. Jürgenson could spend hours recording birdsong on a professional recorder and capture the finest nuances of nature. This very hobby led him one day to a discovery that changed his life. June 1959, an ordinary summer day, with no hint of a sensational discovery. Jürgenson drove to his country house to engage in his usual activity, recording birdsong. His collection of recordings already included dozens of hours of nature sounds. This time, he chose an especially quiet morning. The air was fresh. The garden was enveloped in silence, disturbed only by occasional gusts of wind and the chirping of the chiff-chaffs. He carefully placed the recorder on the windowsill, checked the connection, and pressed the record button. At that time, he did not know that this very recording would change his destiny. A few hours later, Jürgenson returned to the house, poured himself a cup of hot coffee, and sat down to listen to the recording. At first, everything seemed quite ordinary. Familiar bird songs, the soft rustling of the wind, the quiet rustling of leaves. But soon he heard something strange. Instead of the clear sounds of nature, incomprehensible noises appeared on the tape. A hissing sound that reminded him of radio interference, as if someone had interfered with the recording. It seemed unusual. Jürgenson checked the settings, rewound the tape, and played it again. The strange sounds repeated. He thought, maybe the recorder was defective or the device had accidentally picked up a radio signal. He decided to try again and pressed the record button once more. The surroundings became silent. Only the bird song could be heard, nothing unusual. But as soon as he played the recording back, a chill ran down his spine. Among the interference, a voice was heard, clear, distinct, completely different from the nature sounds. And this voice did not belong to him. "Friedrich, they are watching you." These words froze him. He sat motionless and could hardly believe his ears. Was it a mistake? A joke from someone? Jürgenson couldn't find a rational reason for what had happened. He rewound the recording and played it again. The voice didn't disappear. He listened to it repeatedly. It was neither a technical defect, nor a sound error from the equipment, nor a random radio signal. It seemed like a real message directed straight at him. But what could it be? A ghost? An illusion? A perception disorder? From that moment on, Jürgenson was certain. He had to find out the truth. His life would never be the same again. He began his research, not knowing that an even more shocking discovery awaited him. At first, he was convinced that he had stumbled upon something that went beyond the usual understanding. But what exactly? His first assumption was truly exciting. Perhaps he had picked up a signal from an extraterrestrial intelligence. This thought wouldn't leave him. In the mid-20th century, interest in space had reached its peak. The first satellites were launched into orbit, and scientists actively discussed the possibility of life on other planets. And what if Jürgenson had accidentally intercepted a mysterious signal from the depths of the universe? The thought of a possible contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence consumed his mind. He began recording more often, listening to every sound and every detail. And soon, the voices returned. But this time, their tone had changed. There was a sense of threat in it. Among the many recorded messages, one was particularly striking. "Seek the truth in the darkness with a ship." Jürgenson thought long about the meaning of these words. What kind of ship? Was it a metaphor or a literal clue? He recalled stories about ghost ships and began studying paranormal phenomena to find a connection between what he had heard and reports from people who had experienced something incomprehensible. But the strangest incident happened at the end of the summer that same year. One day, Jürgenson went to his country house again, but this time he wasn't alone. His dog, Karina, was with him. He believed that animals could perceive things that were hidden from human senses. At first glance, the recording went as usual. Nothing extraordinary happened. But Karina's behavior immediately drew Jürgenson's attention. As soon as the recording ended, the dog stood up, walked to the window, and stood on her hind legs, supporting herself with her front paws on the windowsill. He observed her. Karina stared attentively into the garden, her head moving from side to side, and her nose sniffing the air, as if she were looking for something or someone. "Karina, who do you see there?" he asked with a slight smile. But the dog didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on something beyond the window, on what Jürgenson could not see. When he played back the recording, what he heard made his blood run cold. Among the usual interference and hissing, a voice was heard. Alive, full of emotion, almost tangible. "Ah, Karina, Karina, you know me. Karina, do you see me?" Jürgenson froze. Someone was speaking on the recording to his dog. But who could it be? There was no one else in the house but him. Karina continued to stare into the garden, her tail wagging slightly, as if she were seeing someone familiar and known to her. This moment became a turning point for Jürgenson. He realized, before him, there were not just radio interferences. It wasn't a technical failure or random acoustic distortions. He no longer doubted. He had made contact with the world of the dead. The 30th of April, 1960, became the day that forever changed Friedrich Jürgenson's perception of life and death. At this point, he still didn't know that this recording would become one of the most convincing pieces of evidence that he was indeed communicating with the afterlife. But a few weeks earlier, he had received tragic news. His old friend, the well-known Dr. Felix Kirsten, had passed away. It was an unexpected loss. Kirsten had been in excellent shape, and nothing had indicated danger. The cause of death was unknown, and Jürgenson couldn't shake the strange feeling that this story was not yet over. It seemed to him that he could feel his friend's presence. This feeling was barely graspable, but persistent. He remembered their long conversations about life, science, and the afterlife. Both had been people who sought answers to the eternal questions. And so, 2 weeks after Kirsten's death, Jürgenson turned on his tape recorder again. It was a regular recording, and he wasn't expecting anything unusual to hear. But as soon as he played the tape, his heart seemed to freeze. Among the noises and interferences between muffled voices and incomprehensible sentences, the words suddenly became clear. "Hear the groaning. Do you hear it? The heart is beating fast." Jürgenson flinched. He rewound the recording and listened again. These words sounded clear and unchanged, as if Kirsten were still alive, trying to deliver an important message. But what exactly? Jürgenson didn't know back then how to decipher this message. A few days later came the confirmation. The doctors determined that Kirsten's cause of death was indeed a heart attack. This recording changed everything. Now Jürgenson could no longer ignore what he had heard. It was the reality. From that moment on, he began to listen to his recordings with even more determination. And with each passing day, the voices became clearer. They were everywhere. They weren't just whispering. They didn't simply break through the disturbances of the ether. They spoke clearly, firmly, consciously. "We hear you from heaven, Friedel. We are alive. Death does not exist." These messages weren't just words. They were proof. Proof that death is not an end, but a transition. Now, Jürgenson was no longer just a researcher of anomalies. He was the man who heard the dead, and perhaps it was truly his task to transmit their voices to the living. When he realized that the voices he recorded could not be explained by ordinary radio interference and were connected to something beyond conventional understanding, he decided to dedicate his entire life to this matter. It stopped being just an experiment. It became his obsession. He spent 8 years making incessant recordings, listening to the ether day and night, trying to receive new messages. Jürgenson recorded voices under various conditions. in his country house, in complete silence, in urban apartments, and even in cemeteries. He experimented with different devices, antennas, and frequencies to find out if there were any patterns in the appearance of these voices. By 1964, his collection totaled 140 kilometers of magnetic tape. It was an unprecedented collection, with no less than 6,000 messages recorded. But what was particularly astonishing, these messages were not random noises. They contained meaningful sentences, answers to questions, entire dialogues. Sometimes the voices interrupted his thoughts, commented on the events in the room, and mentioned him by name. Jürgenson, we are with you. In his diaries, he recorded every word he heard. These voices claimed to be the dead. They assured him that they could hear us, and said that death did not exist. His research led to the publication of a book. In 1964, he published his first work on the phenomenon of radio contact, titled Radio Contact with the Afterlife. This book became a real sensation. Newspapers reported about Jürgenson. Scientists tried to explain his phenomenon, and people who had lost loved ones turned to him for help. His work provoked contradictory reactions. Some called him a liar and a charlatan, others, a prophet who had made the first contact with the afterlife. Some accused him of faking the recordings and claimed it was just a psychological phenomenon, with the brain finding meaning where there was none. But there were also those who claimed to have heard voices on his tapes themselves and felt the presence of those who had already passed from this world. And what if Jürgenson had indeed opened the door to another world? A world we don't even begin to imagine. During one of his lectures in Stockholm, Jürgenson met the illusionist John. He had secretly hidden a miniature tape recorder to record a performance. When he listened to the recording, he discovered a female voice singing, "Listen, listen, contact of the dead." Later, journalists conducted an experiment with Jürgenson. He recorded a new tape in the presence of witnesses. On this recording, everyone heard a voice saying, "We are human. The dead are also human." This incident convinced many that Jürgenson was indeed in contact with something incomprehensible. Friedrich Jürgenson concluded that death is not an end, but a transition to another state. He believed that the fear of death is based on misconceptions. If the dead can communicate with us, it means our life continues. Jürgenson's research remains controversial to this day. Some see it as proof of life after death, while others consider it a play of the mind and acoustic effects. But one thing is clear. His discoveries have made many think about what awaits us after death. Can a person truly contact the world of the dead, or is it just an illusion? The answer to this question must be found by each individual for themselves.